And we passed a sign that said permaculture convergence. And I said, anyway, it turns out that was a car entrance.
Tim, you're actually at the moment the only one, the only media. Okay, so it is actually a really good thing to do the wipe the dust off your clothes, the weary traveller, just so that you bring yourself into the present moment. So I'm not going to do a PowerPoint. The first thing I'd like to do is just to thank you for showing up. Thanks for being here, and thanks for coming to listen to me. I'm Maddy Harland, and some of you will know that I have been running Permaculture magazine for far too long, and with Tim, the man in the Orwellian t-shirt, and we also publish books and run a YouTube channel and do forest gardening and keep bees. But today I want to talk a little bit about extinction and emergence and climate change and permaculture. Could be a poem. So I think everybody here is awakened. There's nobody in this tent that isn't fully conscious and doesn't have, I assume, a daily sense of urgency. I think it's something that once you get what's going on, you carry that with you. It's a wound. And it's very painful, and permaculture is one of the healing balms of that wound. And I think that because we have this strategic, system thinking, nature-based model and understanding, it puts us in a position of responsibility. Because at the moment, around the world, there are a lot of headless chickens. You know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, a group of Oxford scientists said that there was a 93% chance that the climate would be 4 degrees centigrade warmer by the end of this century. It's only 80 years and a whisper. So can you imagine, look what's happening at 0.5 degree centigrade. Look at the Bahamas, it hasn't been hit by anything like the hurricane that's hit it this week since 1980, and that will only become a more frequent occurrence. Look at what's happened to us in June in Europe. It was the hottest June on record ever, and I don't know about you as a grower, but it has certainly interfered with my courgettes and my pumpkin crops. Yes. I've got grapefruit, I've got good nuts, don't tell anyone, but my pumpkins and some of my annual veg are super weird. My sweet corn's great, but you know, I'm looking at how do we design resilience? How do we deal with the psychology of climate change and this extinction emergency that we're hearing and participating in as a movement, and how do we develop our strategic muscles as permaculturists. And that's what really interests me, because I think we have something. And I was talking to Rakesh just before I started, and he said everyone's telling me that, you know, we're living in a terrible world, and yet I keep meeting such wonderful people. So there's some work to be done, there's some balance to be found, there's some soul searching that we need to do personally and collectively as a movement. So I'm going to start by saying a little bit about systems thinking, and I'm not going to do very much of that, because if you want to dive more deeply, then please go and listen to Aranya at some point this weekend. But what I wanted to say was, yes, we have to face facts, yes, we do have to rebel against what's happening, but we also need to develop very strategic strategies for our own sanity as people who are awakened to this crisis and know the changes that are coming. And we do need to find our intellectual and our psychological strength, and the place to go, of course, is nature. And the more I study permaculture, because it is lifelong learning, the more I appreciate and realise what an utterly difficult, naughty, pioneering genius Bill Mollison was. And the more I appreciate his principles, because there's something, I know that we're all into David Holgram's principles, but there is something very, very profound and yet simple about Bill's principles. So if you're not familiar with them, or you haven't visited them for a while, I really urge you to go and look at them again. Think about beneficial relationships and relative location and multifunctional design, because it's nature-based, it's biomimicry, and that's what he was teaching before Janine Benyus invented the term of biomimicry. And he was learning that from the Aboriginal people that he worked with for many years in the 50s in Tasmania. So for me, much of the origin of the expanded worldview and understanding and the systems thinking, relational aspect of permaculture comes from this lineage and this tradition, that we have to very much acknowledge that this isn't just Western ecologists. This is really deeply based in indigenous ancient wisdom. And Bill was a conduit of it. And it wasn't just, you know, once he'd gone beyond his lecturing in Tasmania, it was something that he sought out and learnt wherever he went in the world. So, we are taught to be very linear beings. You know, we go to school and we're very tiny and we learn that A plus B equals C. But in the natural world that might not be at all the case. So what do living systems teach us? Well, they teach us that they have emergent properties. Living systems are greater than the sum of their parts. That's just basic systems thinking. They've got flows and feedback loops. They're in relationship. All the bits of that system is in relationship with the larger system. And what is fascinating about systems is that when they are fully in relationship, what emerges from them is often unexpected. And for me, this is critical. So we've got two molecules of hydrogen and we've got oxygen. And what does that do? Is it water? or add a bit of heat? Is it steam? Change the temperature? Does it go solid? I mean, fundamentally, molecules are emergent systems. If you look at the carbon molecule designs, I had to revise them with my youngest daughter for GCSE science once. It's mind-blowing thinking what carbon can do with hydrogen, and how different molecules can be arranged to have totally different properties. So this is, on a small scale when we go down to that level. But of course we've got other systems in the natural world. We have murmurations of birds. We have the same kind of patterning when the mackerel run in late August, early September, particularly, not so much sadly, off the coasts of our southern English lands. But if you go out to the Atlantic, onto the west coast of Ireland, it's one of the most exciting natural events that I've ever seen. The whole landscape is utterly enlivened by mackerel chasing sprats up estuaries so that they can trap them at the edge of the fresh water and catch them in shallow water. And then you have all of the seals and the dolphins and the diving birds. The whole landscape has become utterly enlivened. And you have this extraordinary underwater murmuration that we can't necessarily see, but is happening. And that is another system. In the human world, cities self-organise. People come in, look at, if you're familiar with London, if you look at Stoke Newington, lots and lots of people from different countries have come into Stoke Newington, and it's had this flowering of it. It's a pretty trendy place actually, but it used to be really deadly in my mind, about 30 years ago. Now it's really trendy. There's amazing fusion food, there's fusion music, it's really vibrant emergent culture. And of course another example of that is the Bronx in New York, the home of hip-hop, because so many people came in from different cultures. I mean, jazz again is an example of an emergent property arising out of different cultures coming together and inventing new music. Our brains are extraordinary emergent systems, and we're told we use 10% of our brains. Imagine if we could use 20% of our brains. Imagine if, akin to the evolutionary step of stepping out of the water and onto the beach, or walking slightly bent over with the opposable thumb and then standing up. Imagine if we could make some kind of leap that created more functionality of our actual neural synapses. But even if we can't, the brain is a great mystery. You've all heard of near-death experiences. People die on the operating table, float up, and then report word for word conversations that the surgeons are having while they're being done to and revived. And it can't be explained, not scientifically. Because my point here is that from an evolutionary perspective, we don't fully understand ourselves. We don't know what our limits are. We haven't fully explored our edges as human beings. And so I think we still have, the door is closing. It's sort of like some gothic, monstrous door that's, Frankenstein is about to come through it, and it's like the crack's still there. Will he get his foot in? Or will we manage to shut the door and make change? And I don't know. But Joanna Macy, the Buddhist philosopher, the woman that co-authored Active Hope, developed the work that reconnects, has always said we don't know whether we're midwives nursing a dying world. Sorry, not midwives, doulas, nursing a dying world, or midwives actually birthing a new culture. We don't know. And so in her Buddhist practice of detachment, there's always that sort of neutrality, there's always that space where opportunity can arise. And I think for me, from a psychological perspective, that's wisdom, because we still don't know. We don't know. So permaculture. Why was I talking about mackerel? Apart from the fact I love them, and murmurations of birds. We know it's a set of principles based on nature. It has 3 foundational ethical guiding ethics. It's a design system that helps us to think in wholes and patterns rather than in bits and pieces. It's a framework for our strategic organisation of low carbon resources, and that's why we're here. We're here to learn more because we can never learn enough of this stuff. And we're here to be together this weekend and really celebrate and enjoy that process and feel our hearts open and feeling that we're with our tribe and that we're in a place where people actually understand what we're talking about and we're not weird, which, you know, is good, because it's always a bit of an effort when you're weird. Quite a few years ago, Tim and I were planting sedums on a garage roof in our front garden, and the neighbour's daughter, who was about like 12 or so, walked past, and she looked up at us and said, "What are you doing now?" And it was like we were the village idiots. You know, we were the weirdos. And it's very difficult to be that isolated. You know, we need our tribe, we need to meet, we need to be together. So, you know, strategy number 1, make sure you have a village community, even if it's virtual. So while we were on our garage roof planting sedums, we were also acquiring 1/3 of an acre of a field, and we didn't have any topsoil at all. We had no invertebrates at all. No birds flew over this patch of field. It had been ploughed and sprayed and treated post-war for decades, and the only reason it could grow anything was because of the fertilisers that were fossil fuel fertilisers. And because we're on chalk, which is a very fragile landscape, the topsoil had just washed or been ploughed away, so it was just subsoil. And what we didn't set out to be earth restoration people. We just had this opportunity, and we had this dream that we wanted to create a nature reserve. And then somehow permaculture came along and blew our minds, and we thought, God, we can have our slow worms and not exactly eat them too, but, you know, eat food and grow food within a nature reserve, and it can be quite wild. So the first thing we did was we planted a wildflower meadow from species that would thrive on a very alkaline, soilless chalk. And that was like putting a scab on an open wound. And then the wind blew across this field, and it was pretty bleak actually, even though it was in the south of England. So we planted a native species hedgerow as a windbreak, and then we wanted to put edible fruit in it as well as standards. And then we started planting little fruit and nut trees. We planted 60 the year after, but it was so windy and there was so little soil. The apple trees had chlorosis, so we put straw bales next to them and peed on them, and then when they rotted down, we mulched the trees with it. That's relative location. And for a while we experimented with ducks and chickens and got fertility from that. But we have quite a high resident fox population, and actually we found that we were buying too many laying pellets, and that from an ecological perspective it perhaps wasn't the best use of resources for the land. So we started enhancing that land with an understory of herbs and soft fruits and perennials and more fruit trees and more nut trees and useful trees, and latterly Szechuan pepper, which has only just cropped this year, that we love, and Nepalese pepper and Chinese dogwood, and clove currants and different types of figs and peaches under glass, which is own rootstock peach, remarkably, and loads of ponds, partly because I love frogs very deeply. And then finally the bees came into our lives and have certainly taken over a quite large part of my consciousness, and we have 4 hives. And diversity blossomed. Butterflies moved in to the chalk downland meadow. Solitary honey and bumblebees showed up. Loads of different extraordinary beautiful flies that, not being a fly expert, I have no idea what they are, but they're very beautiful. They kind of have a colour about them that skinheads had with tonic suits in the 1970s, if you were alive then. I was never a skinhead, I hasten to add. I felt deeply thrilled when we discovered that we had common lizards, because where we live in the southeast they are extremely uncommon, and delighted by slow worms. Possibly 500 species, plus interesting flowers, plus quaking grasses. I don't know enough about grass to be able to go out there and identify all the different grasses. And where there was hardly a bird flying over, there are now, you could say there's possibly too many birds for people with cherry trees, too many blackbirds for people with rather a lot of pears, and charms and charms of goldfinches who feed on the seed heads that we leave until they've thoroughly scattered themselves or been eaten. So now goldfinch, red kite, buzzard, tawny owls calling in the dave, and finches, voles, moles, mice, rats. I'm sometimes not quite so thrilled about the rats because they do like coming inside in the winter, and there are still some foxes around despite our gamekeeper neighbour, and we've never sprayed it, and it is utterly organic, utterly beneficial balance of pest and predator. Never a codling moth to be found because we have bats. It is really how we're meant to garden organically. And of course we do companion planting, but everything is a companion. And we yield honey, fruit, nuts, herbs, bamboo, edible and structural, vegetable, carbon sequestration, nature sanctuary, educational space, happiness, de-stress zone, space to connect. So these are lessons that, having got involved with the ecosystem restoration movement, the camp movement, I understand that what we did, we didn't honestly fully know what we were doing in those days, but what we did was basic ecosystem restoration. We covered the soil, we restored hydrology, we trapped the water, and we reforested on a micro scale. So why am I telling you this story? I wanted to start with the microcosm, and then I wanted to go bigger. So I'd like to take you to France now, very quickly, and talk about Le Bec aux Halloins in Normandy, which is a permaculture farm. 20 hectares, but only 1 hectare is managed intensively, and it has raised beds and hugel cultures and raised beds under cover and polytunnels and companion polycultures, all very densely planted. Outside that 1 market garden hectare are forest gardens and silvipastures, so there's trees with a few poultry and a grazing halls, but basically 49 hectares of that farm are not consciously rewilded, but there's a lot of space for minimum cultivation, minimum agroforestry, and then wilderness. Now in France, the statistics are that 1 farmer needs 120 hectares to make a living. And Le Becco Halloin supports at least 3 people with 1 hectare intensively farmed, and the other 49 left to be more relaxed. So, and I don't think that's just because they're flogging courses. You know, I think this is because they really are running a productive market garden system and selling produce, and it's keeping them occupied. But that's not the only really interesting thing to me. The really interesting thing is there is a scientific report about soil carbon sequestration from the farm, because they've measured it. So the French National Institute for Agricultural Research says that if we added 4 tons per cultivated hectare of organic stock, so we built our soil and made it into a carbon sponge, if we could do that around the world, they reckon that we would stabilise global greenhouse gases. So if we changed our agriculture now, we could stabilise carbon emissions. I'm not saying it wouldn't get warmer, because the great freight train of climate change is relentlessly rattling through our global landscape, but we would begin with agriculture alone. If we moved to permaculture systems and forest garden systems and agroecological systems, we would begin to make a difference. So that's 4 tons per cultivated hectare. But when they analysed the soil carbon level of forest gardens, they found that the target that at Le Becco Halloin, and I can give you a link for this, was 7 times 4 tons per hectare. When they looked at the raised bed systems, this is interesting because we always think we need trees, we always think we need biomass to suck up carbon. But when they looked at the raised bed systems, including the hugel cultures, they found that the annual increase in soil carbon levels was 13 times the level of 4 tons per hectare. And more mind-blowing than that was when they looked at the bio-intensive beds. That's the really hard-worked market garden engine of the business beds, which are all intensely planted. They found that the soil carbon was on 26 times increased levels. So it was, the increase per annum was 10.41%. I can give you these figures, and that was 26 times more the level of 4 tons per thousand. So we're talking about systems that you've got a basic calculation of how to stabilise greenhouse gases, and these permaculture biointensive forest garden systems are just outstripping it. And this wasn't just the French National Institute for Agricultural Research, it was also the Institut Silva, working with the University of Liège in Belgium as well. So it was a number of different researchers coming out and letting out this paper. So what does it mean? It means we can make a huge impact with permaculture systems, with small-scale agriculture. It doesn't mean we need massive amounts of land. It means that we can design bio-intensive systems that can be in the cities and in the suburbs, as well as in rural areas. It means that we have the opportunity to earn livings on far smaller holdings than conventional farming wisdom is currently saying. It's a revolution. It's an utter revolution. And it's a revolution of hope. How are we doing? Ooh, I'm good at talking. Shut up. And then I have to go back to the oceans, because we know that our oceans are in a terrible state. They're saturated with carbon, and that's causing acidification and over 90% of the heat from global warming. So we have expanding ocean deserts, but there's this whole permacultural movement of marine permaculture, and one of the leading lights is a guy called Brian von Hersen, and he wants to restore marine life in subtropical waters, and he's calling this marine permaculture. And basically he builds massive marine permaculture arrays, which that's what he calls them, MPAs. They are lightweight latticed structures which are about half a square mile in size, so well over half a kilometre, nearer a full kilometre of square mile. And he's done it, and he submerges them 80 feet. Sorry about these, you know how Americans do, old school imperial. And I'm trying to think, 80 feet, what's 80 feet? Come on, who's awake? What's 80 feet in sorry? 25 metres, you see, someone is listening. 25 metres below the surface. And what these are for is to attach kelp, and the kelp grows, and the lattices, the marine permaculture arrays, they have powered pumps which are powered by wave power, and they are moving these arrays up and down slightly, and they're pumping water, and they're pumping cold water to the surface, because one of the big problems with when oceans start to die is because it's too warm on the surface and the plankton can't thrive, and so the food chain collapses, and the plankton feed the little fish and the massive whales, and the massive whales swim in and leave their beautiful pooey blooms, which is full of nutrients that then feed the system again, and all that falls apart once you lose plankton. So what happens is the kelp begins to grow, and the plankton comes back into the system, the cold water's coming up, and it's beginning to cycle and become a living system again, and the fish come, and the larger mammals, and they leave their nutrients, which the kelp then suck up, and we re-establish trophic pyramids. We re-establish ecosystems this way, and these ecosystems can be harvested for food and fibre and feed and organic fertiliser and biofuels. So it benefits the humans as part of the ecosystem, and it benefits every form of life from the plankton up to the great whales. And then the kelp dies off and it drops to the bottom of the ocean, but it's sequestered the carbon and it stays there. So this is a carbon sequestering method. And this is what really heartened me. This is what Brian said. In just 57 hours after deployment, the system sparked plankton growth. Shortly thereafter, these blooms attracted various species of fish. 2 weeks later, a 17-foot, 5-metre whale shark was circling the area, feeding on plankton that had started blooming. That makes me happy, because from my personal experience, I know how fast things can regenerate if we do the right things, if we cover the soil, if we create more we bring in a bit of diversity, if we create the conditions for life. Life responds and begets life. It's an emergent system. It's how it's designed. So, in the last few minutes of being here now, I'd like you to turn to someone who maybe you don't know very well. So maybe not the person that shared the journey with you and had a sat-nav versus Google map type of conversation getting here. It's this way. Could you perhaps have a conversation on 2 levels? First of all, like, what do you dream of doing for the world? If you felt fully activated and empowered and filled with active hope, what do you want to do? And it doesn't matter how old you are, young, in the medium life crisis zone of life, or even getting a bit grey-haired and ancient like me. You know, what do you want to do? We've still got life left in us. We're not going down. And we are going to resist. What do you want to do? And then secondly, what do you want to do this month after the permaculture convergence? What is one thing you've been thinking, I really want to do that, but you know, somehow it's dropped way down my list. So think about that too. So big picture, what's the dream of your soul, permaculturists? And what are you going to do next? Over to you. Grab someone who looks nice.
Okay, could I just have the I agree with everything you've said. It's just that I want more of it to in your mind. Yeah, okay. So what I'm saying is, I actually, as a movement,
Sorry? I know.
But it's
I
important.
know why.
Sorry. Anyway.
Of course you are.
So sorry.
That's right, don't worry.
What am I saying?
No, I know.
Sorry.
So what is your dream? And what do you want to do?
Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, you just have got my. Say, I have been trying to get something for a nearly 50 years, and I'm still on the work. So that's why it's important that you evolve it, so that these this is active of mind. And with it incorporated, the discipline seems to have nothing to do with it, but it allows a mindset change. That's the difference. Anyway, I do apologise.
No, it's absolutely fine. I just want this lady to sit on her own. What is your dream?
Well, yeah, but I'm trying to do
So, are you a permaculture? How are you permaculture? You are a practicing permaculturist. And my partner is a keen gardener, but she's not, and she applies. Yeah. All I'm saying is that my little teacher is making all everything that you know and I want. Can't call it a capitalist, call it a race.
They laugh at me, but they're also incredibly curious. What are you up to? So they're all very curious. And I've got really neighbours next to me. So that's good. So what do I do? How do I get a picture? How do I get a picture? And so the immediate thing is what to do is he's given me more soil. He's given me a head start. He's given me another bit of soil. I can spread around the side. Start the forest garden. And then I've got a bag that goes down, and the forest garden bit use the soil. Use that as the bag that goes to the cover tree. Use that bag to plant my trees there, so that the canopies are blocking light this way, so none of these trees you'll get the sunlight, they'll grow beautifully, just that corner that you have the soil. Now it's going to have it, I've got to dig out, here's a relatively slow area, like it goes. Somebody scraped the all I'm saying is my sense of a couple of people come by like the I said, they use that to stabilise the bank. Why did the bank need stabilising? So I don't know why they did that. It was a big company you can use I've got a bomb. And we don't really know why they're spraying all this
Yeah, I mean, you see, obviously,
Well, I'm exhausted.
when you say people that have been rebels who wanted this actually, but they've always been the big mindset is that we've got to destroy, for example, Israel destroyed itself.
Do you all know each other's dreams? Do you need more time? Are you dreaming big?
I'm asleep.
You're asleep.
Dreaming.
Are you in REM? Do you know what you're going to do next?
Dinner.
Yeah.
In the next month, as the first step towards that bigger picture thinking, dream stuff. Yeah? Or did you forget that bit? Okay. Okay, so look, we're coming to the end of this session. Do you have any questions or anything that is important that you want to very briefly say? Or would you like to do something that involves standing up? Yeah, that'll do. Okay, I like to have a democracy in this. Okay, stand up, people. If you can't stand up, then just be up sitting. So we've got this dream, and the dream's up here, okay? And we've got this first step in our vocabulary, our mental vocabulary, and it's down here. So in good permaculture fashion, I would like you to help release the first step energetically and allow it to fly up to your fabulous visions. And we do that by making a noise. So we're going to go, I can't bend and... Okay, I'm not as good as Alice at this kind of talking microphone stuff. So we're going to go, woo. Okay, everyone down there, woo. Can you feel that first step? You do realise when this first step meets the vision, you're going to have to do it. This is a commitment. This is a karmic commitment to your soul. So here we go. Woo. That's it. Well done. So, I'm Maddy Harland. There's lots of permaculture magazines here. There's loads of books. We've been publishing books for 3 decades about permaculture and stuff. And lots of our wonderful authors are here. And I just come and talk to us and hang out with us. Don't let us be lonely in the tea room. And yeah, we're in the tea room. Yeah, Tony is in the tea room with Tim and Maddy. And yeah, just come and say hello to us, please, and tell us your dreams. We want to hear your dreams. And so the point of this is the science is telling us we can do it. Joanna Macy thinks we possibly could do it. You know, we have the design framework, we have the capacity to be strategic. Don't let go of your strategic hope in the face of the despair of what we're being told by the mainstream media. It's really important that the mass populace wakens now and gets it. But it's only one half of the story, and the other half of the story is that this regenerative movement is only at its very earliest stages. So hang on in there. Thank you.